This is not the childhood fairy tale you remember. No gentle kiss, no harmless spell, no tidy ending wrapped in ribbons. Tonight, on Whispers in the Dark, we're going back to the older, crueler root of Sleeping Beauty, where a cursed sleep becomes a doorway for human hunger, where a queen's jealousy turns into a plan of blood and teeth, and where the forest keeps score. This is the true version, the one that was never meant to be told to children. Before we begin, a gentle warning. This story includes mature and disturbing themes, violence and harm. Now imagine the night sky with the moon watching from behind clouds like thin gauze. Imagine a forest so old that the trees have learned the names of every grave beneath them. Imagine a castle that does not simply stand on the hill, but seems to have grown there, stone sprouting from stone, ivy gripping its ribs like a hand that never lets go. And listen, in a kingdom that pretended to be blessed, a great lord and his lady kept a secret hunger. Not for gold, not for conquest, not even for the praises of neighboring courts. They wanted a child the way drowning people want air. They wanted it until their prayers grew hoarse, and their offerings piled high, and their marriages began to sour with the quiet accusation of empty cradles. The Lord sought remedies that smelled of incense and honey. The lady sought remedies that tasted like iron. Midwives came and went. Wise women crossed the threshold with pouches of dried herbs and eyes that would not meet the couple's gaze. Doctors with silver instruments spoke in careful phrases. Nothing took root. Nothing lived. And when nothing lives, the mind starts building other things. One afternoon, when the summer heat pressed the world flat and the air tasted like dust, the lady wandered the palace gardens alone. She followed the sound of water as if it were a voice calling her name, winding through hedges clipped into obedient shapes, passing statues whose faces had been rubbed smooth by generations of hands seeking luck. The sound led her to a fountain hidden behind a curtain of drooping willow branches. The pool was dark, not with shadow, but with depth. It looked like a small eye set in the earth. A great tortoise sat on a stone ledge at the rim, ancient as a carved idol, its shell mottled like old bone. It lifted its head with a slowness that felt deliberate, as if time itself had to bend to accommodate its movement. The lady halted. She should have turned away. She should have called for a servant. But the hunger in her had made her brave in the wrong ways. The tortoise blinked once. Then, in a voice that sounded like wet stones grinding together, it spoke. You want what does not come. You want what your body has shut its gates against. The lady's hands tightened around the folds of her dress. She did not ask how it knew. In that place, among willow shadows and water that did not reflect the sky, the impossible felt ordinary. Tell me, she whispered. Tell me what to do. The tortoise regarded her, and in its gaze she felt weighed, measured, and found wanting. And yet the answer still came. There's a way. There's always a way. But you will pay it like everyone pays. Not with coin, with consequence. Go to the far wood. Find the old spinning house where the women no longer go. In its loft, under a beam blackened by 100 years of smoke, you will find a spindle carved from you. Touch it to the tip of your finger. Let it taste you. Do not wipe the blood. Do not speak. Return home without looking behind you. When the moon is thin as a blade, lie with your husband. If you live through the dream that comes, you will bear a child. The lady's heart battered her ribs. She heard only the word child, and everything else became decoration. What is the dream? She asked. But the tortoise had already sunk into the fountain pool, as if the water were a door, leaving only widening rings that moved outward and then vanished, as if nothing had ever been disturbed. The lady told no one. In the palace, secrets were not merely kept, they were cultivated. She disguised herself in plain clothes and left at dusk when the guards were bored, and the sky had begun to bruise purple over the hills. The far wood waited like a held breath. The forest did not welcome her. The trees grew close, their branches knitting together overhead until the path was a tunnel of dim green. The air cooled and thickened. Every sound traveled strangely, as if it had to push through invisible webs. She smelled rot under the sweetness of pine, smelled mushrooms and damp earth, and something faintly animal, like a den where a beast had slept too long. She found the spinning house by accident and by inevitability. It crouched at the edge of a clearing, its roof sagging, its windows blind with grime. Someone had boarded the door once, long ago, and the boards had split with age. When she stepped inside, the air that greeted her was stale and sour. The smell of dust and old cloth and burnt fat from candles that had guttered out. A loom stood in the corner like a skeleton. Spindles lay scattered across the floorboards like dropped bones. The lady climbed the narrow stairs to the loft, the wood groaning under her weight, each step a complaint. Under the blackened beam, there was a box, and in the box lay the yew spindle, darker than the shadows around it. The carving on its shaft was not decorative. It was a script, a language that crawled. She could not read it, but her eyes slid over the symbols with discomfort, as if they were not meant to be looked at. Her hand trembled as she lifted it. The yew felt warm, though the loft was cold. It pulsed faintly, like something alive pretending to be wood. Touch it to the tip of your finger, the tortoise had said. Let it taste you. The lady held out her hand. She pressed the point to her skin. There was no sharp pain. There was only a sudden, intimate chill, like a kiss from a mouth that had been dead for days. Her finger reddened. A bead of blood rose and then spread in a thin line down her palm. The spindle drank, not physically, but in a way that made her dizzy, as if it were pulling something from her that had nothing to do with blood. She did not wipe it. She did not speak. She forced herself down the stairs and out into the forest, the dusk deepening to night. As she walked, she felt the urge to look behind her. It came in waves, almost unbearable, like the need to sneeze, like the need to turn when someone calls your name. She kept her eyes forward. She counted her steps. She listened to her own breath. And all the while, behind her, something moved through the underbrush with a slow patience, never quite close enough to touch, never quite far enough to dismiss. When she reached the palace gates, the guards did not recognize her at first. Her face was pale and damp, her eyes too wide. Her finger still bled in a thin, lazy seep. She hid her hand in her sleeve and hurried inside before anyone could ask questions. That night, the moon was thin as a blade, just as the tortoise had promised. The lady lay beside her husband in their high bed, under embroidered curtains that could not keep anything out. The Lord, exhausted by his own longing, held her with a tenderness that almost made her cry. When they joined, it was not lust that moved them, but desperation. And desperation can open doors that should remain locked. As the candles burned low, sleep took the lady like a hand over her mouth. She dreamed. In her dream, she stood in the same forest, though it was larger, vaster, and the trees were so tall their tops vanished into black. There was no moon. There was no sky. There was only a ceiling of branches and a darkness that pressed down. A sound came, a soft scraping, as if something heavy were dragging itself over leaves. She turned and saw a figure approaching along the path. It wore a cloak made of stitched animal skins. Its head was bowed. Its hands were long and stained. And where its face should have been, there was only a smooth, pale surface, as if someone had erased it. The lady tried to run, but her feet sank into the ground. The soil turned to mud. The mud turned to something thicker. She felt it pulling at her ankles like hungry mouths. The faceless figure stopped in front of her. It leaned close. It smelled of yew and damp graves. "You wanted a child," it whispered, though it had no mouth. "You wanted life. You asked for it. Now you will be opened." The lady tried to scream and found her throat sealed. The figure's hands moved over her with a familiarity that made her stomach twist. It was not love. It was not even desire. It was possession, entitlement, the cold act of taking. In the dream, her body was not hers. The faceless one treated her like a vessel left unattended. She felt herself split open in ways that had nothing to do with flesh and everything to do with ownership. She felt something enter her that was not a man and not a beast, but an intention. When she woke, the sheets were damp with sweat. Her husband slept beside her, unaware. The candles had gone out, leaving only the pale line of the moon through a crack in the curtains. Her finger ached, and when she looked, the wound had closed into a small dark mark, like a puncture from a thorn. She did not tell her husband about the dream. She did not tell anyone, but she began to notice things. Her appetite changed. She craved bitter foods. She craved meat that was still warm. She found herself standing at the window at night, staring into the gardens as if waiting for someone to come. And then, after a time, she knew with certainty that she was with child. The kingdom rejoiced. Bells rang. People flooded the streets with flowers and shouted blessings. In the palace, the servants scurried like excited birds. The Lord walked with his hand on his lady's belly, as if protecting a treasure. But in the quiet moments, when the lady was alone, she would press her palm to her abdomen and feel a strange flutter, like the turning of pages in a book she could not read. When her time came, it came hard. Thunder rolled over the castle, and rain hammered the roof like thrown stones. The midwives sweated. The Lord paced. The lady screamed until her voice broke, and then screamed anyway. Hours dragged into days. Finally, the child slid into the world, slick and furious, and the midwife held it up with shaking hands. A girl, she cried. A girl with hair black as wet ink. They named her Talia, for a flower that blooms stubbornly in the wrong season. They dressed her in lace. They placed her in a cradle carved from pale wood. They brought gifts and blessings and promises of a bright future. But the tortoise did not come back to the fountain. The dream did not leave the lady. It crouched in the corners of her mind, watching. Years passed. Talia grew. She was a child of striking beauty, but not the soft, harmless kind. There was something in her eyes that made people pause, as if a second presence stood behind her gaze. She laughed rarely, but when she did, it sounded like wind through dead leaves. She preferred the castle's oldest rooms, the ones filled with tapestries that had faded into scenes of hunts and battles no one remembered. She wandered the corridors at night, and servants began to swear they saw her small figure reflected in dark windows where she was not standing. On the day of her 15th year, the air outside was bright and crisp, and the forest beyond the palace walls had begun to shift into autumn, leaves turning the color of bruises and flame. The lady, now grown older and more fragile, watched her daughter dance in the great hall with the stiff grace of nobility. She thought, for a moment, that perhaps the price had been paid and the consequence endured, and that they were safe. But stories that begin in hunger do not end in satisfaction. That afternoon, Talia slipped away from the festivities. She wandered down a stairwell that few used, into the belly of the castle, where the stones smelled of damp. She followed a faint sound, a delicate whirring, as if someone were spinning thread. She found an old woman in a narrow chamber. The woman's back was bent, her hair a thin white veil. She sat at a spinning wheel that looked too big for the room, its wood darkened by age. A spindle turned between her fingers, smooth and sharp. Talia watched, entranced. The thread that formed was pale as moonlight. It caught in the air like a strand of spider silk. "May I try?" Talia asked. The old woman did not look up. Her eyes were milky, but they seemed to see too much. "Everyone wants to try," the woman murmured. Talia stepped forward. She reached out. The spindle kissed her finger. Blood welled up, bright and startling against her pale skin. Talia blinked, confused. She raised her finger to her mouth as any child might, and then her eyes unfocused. She swayed. She reached for the table. She did not find it. She fell. The old woman sighed, as if disappointed, but not surprised. She continued spinning. The wheel turned. The thread gathered in a heap like accumulating hair. When Talia's parents found her, she lay on the stone floor, her face peaceful. There was no wound except the small puncture on her finger. She will wake, the doctor said, though their voices lacked conviction. She is only sleeping. But the days passed, and Talia did not wake. The lady sat by the bed until her own eyes burned, and her heart began to stutter with panic. The Lord ordered priests to pray, and physicians to bleed, and witches to be hunted. Nothing helped. Talia remained as still as a painting. Her chest rose and fell so faintly it seemed imagined. Her skin stayed warm. Her lips stayed softly parted. She did not decay. It was as if time had decided to forget her. In the end, unable to bear the sight of their living daughter trapped in a death-like slumber, the Lord ordered a summer house built deep in the forest, a place of quiet and beauty where Talia could rest away from the castle's echoes. They carried her there on a bed draped in white cloth. The servants wept as they walked. The trees watched. The summer house stood in a clearing where ferns grew tall, and wildflowers bloomed even when the season changed. A stream ran nearby, whispering endlessly over stones. The roof was thatched. The windows were wide. Sunlight filled the rooms in the day, and at night the forest pressed close, leaves tapping the panes like fingers. They laid Talia on a bed there, dressed in a gown that shimmered like frost. They left food, though she never ate. They left water, though she never drank. They left candles, though no one was there to light them. Then, because grief is exhausting, and kings do not have the luxury of mourning forever, they locked the doors and left her. The forest took the summer house into itself. Ivy climbed. Moss softened the steps. Branches leaned in. The path grew narrow. Years later, a different king rode into those woods, chasing a falcon. He was young enough to still be bored by peace, rich enough to treat the forest as entertainment. His men followed behind, shouting and laughing, their horses snapping twigs under hoof. The falcon flew ahead, vanishing into the thick canopy. The young king urged his horse on, separated from his companions by enthusiasm. He pushed through brambles and low branches until he broke into the clearing where the summer house stood like a forgotten dream. He dismounted. He approached the door. It was warped with age, but not ruined. He tried the handle. It did not yield. He peered through a window smeared with moss and saw a bed inside. And on the bed, he saw her. Even through the dirty glass, Talia's beauty struck him like a blow. It was not the polite appreciation of courtly portraits. It was the sudden animal awareness of something rare and possessed of its own gravity. She looked untouched by time, as if the years had slid off her skin without leaving a mark. Her hair lay across the pillow like spilled ink. Her mouth was slightly open, the faintest suggestion of breath visible in the rise of her chest. The king's heart pounded. He called out, but there was no answer. He smashed the window with the hilt of his sword. Glass fell like ice onto the floor. He climbed inside. He stood over her, trembling with a desire he did not name and did not examine. In stories, men like this are written as heroes. In the old versions, they are written as they are. He touched her face. Her skin was warm. He pressed his fingers to her throat and felt the pulse, slow and steady. He whispered to her nonsense words, promises, flattery, as if language could turn a lock. She did not move. Something in him curdled. The silence became a challenge. The stillness became permission. The king, alone in a house buried in forest, did what predators do when they believe no eyes are watching. He violated the sleeping girl. The act was not described by the forest, but the forest remembered. The stream did not stop whispering. The birds did not sing. The air seemed to thicken, as if even the light did not want to witness. When the king was finished, he straightened his clothes, breathing hard, looking at her as if she were an object he had claimed rather than a person he had harmed. He stayed a little longer, waiting, half expecting her to wake, perhaps even to smile at him, because cruel men often expect gratitude from the people they injure. She did not wake. Eventually, he heard his men calling for him in the distance. He climbed back out through the broken window, mounted his horse, and rode away, leaving the sleeping girl in the ruined quiet of the summer house. He did not speak of it, not to his men, not to his queen, for he had won, a woman of sharp intelligence and sharper pride, a woman who had learned that in a palace, love is less useful than control. And time moved on. Months passed, then more. The sleeping girl, trapped under whatever spell had been triggered by blood and spindle, began to change in ways no one could see at first. Beneath her ribs, life stirred. Beneath her stillness, consequences grew. On a night when the moon was full and bright, and the forest shadows lay clean and hard, Talia's body convulsed. Her face tightened. A sound escaped her throat, a strangled gasp, as if she were surfacing from deep water. And then, without waking, she gave birth. Twins, a boy and a girl, small and furious, their cries filling the summer house like an alarm. There were no midwives. There were no hands to catch them. They slid into the world onto the bed sheets, slick with birth and instinct, and yet they lived. They rooted blindly, driven by a hunger older than thought. One of them, the girl, wriggled close to Talia's breast, finding skin by scent and luck. The boy followed, his tiny mouth searching. They fed, and as they did, one of the bobbies latched not to Talia's breast, but to her finger, to the place where the spindle had pierced. The child's mouth closed around that small, hardened puncture and sucked as if it were a nipple. And with that suck, something shifted. The old dried poison, the enchantment locked in her blood, pulled free. Talia's eyes flew open. Her first breath as an awake woman in years was a scream. It tore out of her, raw and wild, and then she choked on it, staring around the room in confusion and terror. She saw the broken window, the moss creeping over the walls, the dust in the air. She looked down and saw the two infants pressed against her, feeding. For a moment, she could not understand. Her mind reached for explanations and found none. Then, as memory returned in fragments, as she remembered the spinning room, the prick, the fall, the endless dark sleep, she realized with a cold shock that time had passed, and that her body had been used while she was not inside it to stop it. She wept, silently at first, then with shaking sobs that scared the bobbies and made them cry in response. She gathered them close, holding them as if she could hold the world together. She named them Sun and Moon. She did not know why. The names arrived in her mouth like something remembered rather than invented. Perhaps her mind needed brightness to fight the horror. Perhaps she sensed that they were bound to larger forces, born under an old curse, pulled into being by violence and magic. The days that followed were strange and fevered. Talia, with no supplies but what had been left years before and what the forest offered, learned to survive. She foraged berries. She caught fish in the stream with desperate hands. She tore fabric into strips for swaddling. She warmed the bobbies by holding them close. She slept in snatches, always waking at small sounds, always aware of the broken window and the possibility of someone coming again. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps outside, slow and deliberate. Sometimes she thought she saw a pale shape moving between trees. Once, at dusk, she looked up and saw a great tortoise in the clearing, its shell dark and wet, its eyes like old coins. It watched her for a long time and then vanished into the undergrowth without a sound. The forest did not forgive. It only observed. Meanwhile, in the other kingdom, the young king began to notice a restlessness in himself. He dreamed of a girl's face, pale and still. He woke with the taste of yew in his mouth, though he had never eaten it. He found himself wandering toward windows, staring at forests, listening for something he could not name. Then one day, when he was riding near the woods again, he could not resist. He ordered his men to remain behind and rode alone to the clearing. He saw smoke, thin, hesitant smoke, rising from a crude fire pit outside the summer house. His heart lurched. He approached the broken window and looked in. Talia stood inside, holding a baby on each hip. Her hair was tangled. Her face was thinner. Her eyes were awake, and in them there was no softness, only a terrible clarity. The king opened his mouth to speak, and she spoke first. "Who are you?" she said, and her voice was steady, but it carried something sharp, like a blade held close to the skin. The king stared at the children. His stomach tightened with a recognition he did not want to claim. I found you here once, he began, and even as he spoke, he heard how pathetic it sounded. Once, she repeated, did you? He tried to step inside, and she stepped back, drawing the bobbies away from him as if he were a fire. I am the king of the valley lands, he said. I can take you away. I can give you comfort. I can give those children a future. Talia laughed once, a sound like dry leaves cracking. You can give, she said. You have taken enough. The king flushed. He looked toward the window, toward the forest outside, as if hopping the trees would not understand him. But the trees had been there. The trees always understood. He swallowed. His pride battled his fear. His desire battled his shame. In the end, the king did what men with power often do when confronted with the consequences of their own actions. He decided to make a story that absolved him. He reached out his hands, palms up, a gesture of peace. Come, he said softly. Come to my castle. Be my lady. Let the children be raised as royal blood. No one need know how we met. No one need know what happened in the forest. I will give you a name. I will give you safety. Talia looked at the bobbies, and then at him. There was a moment, a long stretch of silence in which the only sound was the stream and the faint creak of the summer house settling. In that silence, Talia weighed the world. Alone in the forest, she would always be vulnerable. In the castle, she would be surrounded by stone and servants and 1,000 eyes. But she would have food. She would have shelter. And perhaps, in the palace, she could keep her children from being swallowed by wilderness. She nodded once, not in acceptance of him, but in acceptance of the fact that she had no gentle choices left. Very well, she said, but understand this. You do not own me. The king pretended not to hear the warning in her voice. He clapped his hands and called for his men. They arrived startled, then delighted to see a beautiful woman and 2 healthy infants in the forest, as if the woods had decided to gift their king with miracles. They brought a carriage. They wrapped Talia in a cloak. They cooed at the bobbies. They rode back to the castle with songs on their lips. The queen heard the commotion before she saw it. She came down the grand staircase like a descending storm, her gown heavy with embroidery, her hair pinned in perfect coils. When she saw her husband returning with a strange woman and 2 infants, something inside her went very still. The king introduced Talia as a noblewoman found lost in the woods. He presented the twins as orphan children she had been caring for. He spoke quickly, smoothly, building his lie brick by brick. The queen smiled. It was a beautiful smile. Courtiers sighed with relief. Servants relaxed. But those who had lived in that palace long enough noticed the way the queen's fingers tightened on the railing, noticed how her eyes did not blink. Welcome, she said to Talia. How fortunate we are. That night, the queen lay beside the king and listened to him breathe. She did not sleep. In the dark, she watched the outline of his face and thought about all the ways a person can be punished without leaving a mark. Over the next days, she observed. She asked questions with a sweetness that made people eager to answer. She watched the king glance toward the nursery where the twins were kept. She watched him linger too long at the doorway. She watched the strange woman, Talia, walk through the halls with a contained wariness, like a wolf forced into a house of dogs. The queen learned the truth the way clever queens do, not from confession, but from pattern. The children, she noticed, had the king's chin. The boy's eyes were the same dark hazel as the king. The girl's hair curled at the ends in the same way. And the king, despite his careful story, could not hide a kind of ownership in the way he looked at them. It was not affection, not truly. It was recognition, and guilt, and something uglier, a pride in his ability to make consequence disappear behind velvet curtains. The queen's smile did not falter. She began to plan. One morning, when the king rode out to inspect his hunting lands, the queen summoned the palace cook. He was a broad man with scarred hands and a face that looked carved from worry. He bowed low, trembling. "Yes, your majesty," he whispered. The queen dismissed the servants. She stood alone with him in her private chamber, where the walls were hung with tapestries depicting saints and martyrs. "I have a delicate task for you," she said. The cook's mouth went dry. He had served enough years to know that delicacy in a queen's voice meant brutality behind it. "There is a woman in this castle," the queen continued. "She came from the woods. She brought with her 2 children. They are not what they seem." The cook did not speak. He could not. The queen stepped closer. She smelled of rose oil and cold metal. "Tonight," she said, "I want you to prepare a feast for the king. A dish he will never forget. You will bring me the 2 children." The cook's eyes widened, horror spreading across his face like ink. "Your Majesty," he stammered, "they are infants." The queen's voice remained gentle. "Do you think I do not know what they are?" The cook's knees nearly buckled. "Please," he whispered, "please." The queen tilted her head, considering him as one considers a tool. "If you refuse," she said, "you will hang by sunrise. If you obey, you will live, and you will be rewarded. There are men who would do anything to keep their heads attached to their bodies. I am asking you to be one of them." The cook swallowed, tears forming in his eyes. He nodded, because fear can make even good people commit evil, or try not to. The queen sent him away. Then she went to the nursery herself, accompanied by a maid she trusted, a woman with narrow eyes and a mouth that never smiled. The maid carried a covered basket. The queen looked at sun and moon sleeping, their tiny fists clenched as if fighting invisible battles. For a brief moment, something human flickered in her face. Then it was gone, replaced by the smooth mask of entitlement. She instructed the nurse that the children must be taken to the kitchen for a special blessing ritual, a royal superstition dressed in authority. The nurse hesitated. The queen's gaze hardened. The nurse obeyed. Sun and moon were placed into the basket, wrapped in blankets, their warmth trapped under cloth. They stirred, making small noises that sounded like questions. The maid carried the basket down corridors, downstairs, toward the kitchen. But the cook, waiting in the shadows near the pantry, had not stopped being a person. He had been shaking since he left the Queen's chamber. His hands, so capable of chopping and carving, trembled now. His mind raced, grasping for a way to obey, and not obey at the same time. In the courtyard behind the kitchens, there was a small shed where stray animals were sometimes kept before being slaughtered. Inside that shed, the cook had hidden 2 young goats that had been delivered for an upcoming banquet. When the maid's footsteps approached, the cook stepped out, bowing low, taking the basket with a posture of obedience. The maid, satisfied, left at once, eager to return to the Queen with news of compliance. The cook hurried to the shed. He lifted the cloth and looked at the bobbies' faces. Their eyes were open now, dark and glossy. The girl made a small sound. The boy reached a hand toward him. The cook choked back a sob. "Forgive me," he whispered. "Forgive me." He carried the basket to a servant's entrance that led out of the kitchens and into the gardens. It was a door used for waste and deliveries, rarely watched. He bribed a stable boy with a gold coin and told him to take the basket, to run to the edge of the forest, to find the summer house clearing and leave the children there. He lied, saying it was an urgent royal command, and the boy, terrified and dazzled by the coin, obeyed without question. Then the cook returned to the shed, slaughtered the goats with hands that shook so badly he nearly cut himself, and prepared them as the Queen demanded, seasoning and roasting until the meat smelled rich and savory. That night the king sat at his table. Candles burned bright. Musicians played soft music. The Queen sat beside him, smiling. The dish was served. The Queen watched as the king lifted his fork. "Eat," she urged. "Eat, my love. This is a rare delicacy." The king ate. He praised it, oblivious, tasting only spice and fat and tenderness. The Queen leaned close and whispered, so softly only he could hear. "Do you like it?" she asked. "Do you know what it is?" The king frowned, confused, mouth full. "It is sun," she murmured. "It is moon." The king froze, his face drained of color. He stared at the Queen as if seeing her for the first time. "What are you saying?" he whispered, voice cracking. The Queen's smile widened. "You brought them into my house," she said. "You brought your sin to my table. Now eat it." The king's stomach lurched. He gagged, pushing the plate away. He stumbled back from the table, knocking his chair over. Servants rushed forward in alarm. The Queen stood, commanding silence with a lifted hand. No one moved. No one spoke. The king stared at his plate, then at the Queen, then at his own hands, as if they were contaminated. He ran from the hall and vomited in the corridor, retching until his throat burned. The Queen watched him go with calm satisfaction. She turned to the cook, who stood at the edge of the hall, face gray with terror. "Bring me the woman," the queen said. Talia was seized from her chamber by guards. She fought, not with useless flailing, but with sharp movements, biting and scratching, a creature cornered. Still, they dragged her through the halls to the queen's private room. The queen dismissed the guards and stood alone with Talia, the tapestries of saints watching from the walls. Talia's eyes were wild. "Where are my children?" she demanded. The queen tilted her head. "Children," she echoed. "You mean the little mistakes you carried into my home." Talia lunged. The queen's maid stepped forward from the shadows, striking Talia across the face with the back of her hand. Talia stumbled, blood blooming at the corner of her mouth. The queen approached, her voice soft, almost tender. "Your children are gone," she said. "The king has eaten." For a heartbeat, Talia did not understand. The words floated in the air like ash. Then comprehension hit her with such force she nearly collapsed. "No," she whispered, "no." The queen watched her carefully, savoring the moment. "I will have you punished," the queen said. "I will have you burned. I will have your bones ground into powder and scattered." Talia lifted her head slowly. Her eyes, once merely wary, became something else. Something ancient. Something that looked past the queen and into the deep machinery of consequence. "I did not come here to die quietly," Talia said. The queen laughed. "And what will you do?" she asked. "You are alone." Talia's mouth curved, not into a smile, but into a grim certainty. "No," she said, "I am not." In that moment, the air in the chamber shifted. The candles flickered as if a wind had passed through, though the windows were closed. The tapestries stirred, their woven saints seeming to twist in discomfort. The queen's smile faltered for the first time. Talia stepped back, and though her hands were empty, the queen flinched as if Talia held a knife. Talia turned and ran. The palace erupted. Guards shouted. Doors slammed. Servants screamed as Talia tore through corridors like a hunted animal. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she had to move. She reached the courtyard. The night air hit her face cold and damp. Clouds covered the moon. Torches flared along the walls, casting shadows that leapt like demons. Talia sprinted toward the stables. A horse reared. A groom shouted. Someone grabbed at her sleeve and missed. She managed to mount a horse bareback, yanking the reins, digging her heels into its sides. The horse bolted through the gate, past startled guards, into the road that led toward the forest. Behind her, the queen's voice echoed, shrill with fury. "Bring her back," she screamed. "Bring her back alive." The horse thundered into the trees. Branches whipped at Talia's face. Her hair came loose, streaming behind her. Tears blurred her vision, but she did not slow. The forest swallowed her, the darkness swallowing torchlight and shouts. For hours she rode, until the horse's breath came in ragged bursts. Then she slid off and stumbled on foot, guided by instinct, by memory, by the feeling of an invisible string pulling her toward the clearing where the summer house waited. When she reached it, she fell to her knees in the grass, sobbing so hard she could not breathe. Then she heard a sound, a small cry. Talia lifted her head. She crawled toward the summer house, fingers digging into the earth. She pushed open the warped door and saw, by the faint light filtering through the broken window, two tiny bundles on the bed, sun and moon, alive. For a moment, Talia could not move. It was as if her body did not dare believe. Then she surged forward, gathering them into her arms, pressing her face to their hair, inhaling the scent of milk and warmth and life. The relief hit her like a wave and almost knocked her unconscious. "They are alive," she whispered over and over. "They are alive." The bobbies cried, startled by her intensity, and then quieted as she held them close, rocking. She did not know how they had returned. She did not know what mercy had intervened. But deep in her chest, she felt a certainty that something had been watching, something older than kings and queens, something that had its own balance to keep. Outside, the forest was quiet, too quiet. Talia's head snapped up. She listened. Footsteps, not the random crackle of an animal, not the soft rustle of leaves. Human footsteps, many of them, approaching with purpose. The Queen's men were coming. Talia's mind raced. She could run, but with infants, she would be slow. She could hide, but the clearing was open. She could fight, but against armed men she would lose. Then, from the corner of the room, she heard a slow, scraping sound. She turned. A great tortoise sat in the shadows, half hidden beneath a table that had not been there before, as if the room itself had shifted. Its shell gleamed faintly, its eyes fixed on Talia with the same old coin stare. "You wanted life," it murmured. "You took it through darkness. The darkness took from you. Now the debt must be settled." Talia's throat tightened. "Help me," she whispered. The tortoise blinked. "There is help," it said, "but help has teeth. Place the children on the bed. Do not look away. Do not scream." Talia's hands trembled. The footsteps outside grew louder. She could hear men's voices, the clink of armor, the hiss of torches. She laid sun and moon on the bed, kissing their foreheads, whispering words of comfort she did not feel. Then she turned to the tortoise. "What do I do?" she asked. The tortoise's voice came like a verdict. "You tell the truth," it said. "You let the forest hear it." The door to the summer house shuddered under a heavy kick. Wood splintered. The door burst inward. Men poured in, torches blazing, swords drawn. Their faces were hard, their eyes scanning the room. "There she is," one shouted. Talia stood between them and the bed. "Do not come closer," she said. The leader sneered. "By order of the Queen," he said, "you are to be taken back." Talia's mouth tasted like blood. "By order of the Queen," she said, "my children were to be murdered." By order of the queen, the cook was commanded to feed them to the king. By order of the queen, I am to be burned. The men hesitated, uncomfortable, but still moved forward. Lies, the leader snapped. Talia lifted her chin. Ask the cook, she said. The leader's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer. Take her, he ordered. A hand grabbed Talia's arm. And then the forest answered. A wind surged through the clearing, slamming into the summer house like a living thing. The torches guttered, their flames bending sideways, spitting sparks. Leaves flew through the broken window in a sudden storm. The walls creaked. The floorboards moaned. The men froze, startled. From the shadows beyond the doorway, something moved. At first it looked like fog, thick and low to the ground. Then it rose, taking shape, gathering density. It formed a figure, tall and cloaked in something that looked like stitched animal skins. The faceless one. It stepped into the room. The air grew colder. The men's breath showed white. The leader raised his sword, voice trembling. What is that? He demanded. Talia did not move. She felt her fear, but she also felt something else, a grim alignment, as if the universe had finally decided to point its weight in a direction. That, she said quietly, is what comes when you build your life on taking. The faceless one turned its smooth head toward the men. It lifted one long hand. The men screamed, not because it touched them, not at first, but because they suddenly felt what it meant to be powerless. They felt their bodies become heavy, their limbs sluggish, their voices trapped behind their teeth. They dropped their weapons one by one, metal clattering onto wood. The faceless one moved among them with slow certainty. It did not kill them with gore or spectacle. It did something worse. It took from them what they had come to take from Talia, their agency. One man fell to his knees, sobbing, his hands clawing at the floor as if trying to anchor himself to reality. Another tried to run and found the doorway had become a wall of twisting vines. A third begged for mercy, and the faceless one tilted its head as if the concept were foreign. Talia watched, heart hammering. The bobbies began to cry on the bed, sensing the wrongness in the air. The faceless one turned back to Talia. It had no mouth, but its voice sounded inside her skull, intimate and cold. You were opened, it said. You were used. You were made a vessel. Do you want to return what was given? Talia's hands clenched. I want my children safe, she whispered. I want the queen to stop. The faceless one's hand hovered over her, not touching. Then you must go back, it said. You must speak where you were silenced. You must stand where you were dragged. You must let the palace see what it has tried to hide. Talia swallowed. She looked at sun and moon, their small faces scrunched with cries. She thought of the queen's smile. She thought of the king's vomit in the corridor. She thought of the cook's trembling hands, and of the stable boy, whoever he had been, who had carried her children back to safety. She nodded once. The faceless one lowered its hand. The air warmed slightly. The vines at the doorway loosened, creating a path. The men collapsed, panting, freed but broken, staring at Talia with the terror of people who have glimpsed something beyond their understanding. Go, the faceless one whispered. Talia wrapped sun and moon in blankets, strapped them to herself with torn fabric, and stepped out into the clearing. The forest path ahead was lit by moonlight now, though clouds still covered the sky. The light seemed to come from the ground, pale and guiding. She walked. Behind her, the men did not follow. They could not. The forest led her back toward the palace, not by the long road, but by hidden trails that twisted like thoughts. Branches parted for her. Thorns bent away. Owls watched silently from above. The stream's whisper followed her like a warning. By dawn, Talia stood at the palace gates. The guards on duty saw her and shouted. They raised spears. They moved to block her. Talia did not stop. I am here, she called, voice ringing clear in the cold morning. I am here, and I am not alone. The guards hesitated, unsettled by the certainty in her tone, by the way the air around her seemed to vibrate, as if the world itself leaned in to listen. The commotion drew servants, then courtiers, then the king himself, stumbling onto the balcony in a robe, eyes bloodshot, hair disheveled. When he saw Talia holding the twins, his face contorted. They are alive, he whispered, as if speaking to a ghost. The queen appeared behind him, fully dressed, her hair perfect, her expression calm. For a moment, the courtyard was silent. Then Talia spoke. She told the truth. She did not dramatize it. She did not soften it. She spoke of the forest and the summer house. She spoke of waking to find her body had been used while she slept. She spoke of giving birth alone and nomming her children. She spoke of being dragged before the queen. She spoke of the queen's order to kill her twins, to cook them, to feed them to the king. Murmurs rippled through the courtyard like wind through wheat. Faces turned toward the queen. Servants exchanged horrified glances. Some crossed themselves. The queen's eyes narrowed. Lies, she said sharply. This woman is mad. She seeks to ruin us with scandal. Talia lifted the children higher, so all could see their faces. Look at them, she said. Look at their eyes. Look at their chin. Tell me they are not his. The king flinched. The queen's jaw tightened. And then, as if summoned by the mention of his name, the cook stepped forward from the crowd. His face was drawn. His hands were red from chopping. He looked like a man who had not slept. He fell to his knees. It is true, he whispered. It is true, your majesties. The queen commanded me. She commanded me to kill the infants. I could not. I slaughtered goats instead. I sent the children away. A gasp rose from the crowd. The queen's face went pale. For the first time, her composure cracked. You traitor, she hissed. The cook bowed his head. I would rather be a traitor than a monster, he said, voice breaking. The queen's maid stepped forward. hand on a hidden blade, eyes sharp. And then the air changed again. The courtyard's shadows deepened, even though the sun had risen. The light seemed to dull, as if someone had placed a thin cloth over the world. People looked around, uneasy. A cold wind swept through the gates. The torches on the walls, unlit in daylight, flared suddenly with pale flames that did not give warmth. The queen's eyes widened, not in fear, but in recognition, as if she had always known some reckoning might come, and had chosen to believe she could outrun it. Behind Talia, in the open space of the courtyard, the faceless one appeared. It did not step through the gate. It simply was there, as if the world had decided to make visible what had always been present. Screams erupted. People scattered. Guards raised weapons and then lowered them again, unable to move, pinned by terror. The king stared, mouth hanging open. "What is that?" he breathed. Talia did not look back. She kept her eyes on the queen. "This is what follows," she said. "This is what watches." The queen drew herself up, fury blazing. "You think to frighten me with tricks," she snapped. "You think some forest spirit can unmake a queen." The faceless one turned its smooth head toward her. It raised its hand. The queen froze mid-step. Her breath hitched. Her fingers clawed at the air. "No," she whispered, and for the first time, her voice held fear. The faceless one did not strike her down. It did not tear her apart. It did not spill her blood for spectacle. It did something more fitting. It took her voice. The queen's mouth opened, but no sound came. She tried again. Nothing. Her eyes widened in panic. She slapped her own throat, as if sound were trapped beneath the skin. Then the faceless one took her smile. The muscles of her face went slack. Her expression became blank, empty, stripped of the mask she had used as a weapon. Then it took her authority, not legally, not through paperwork or proclamation, but through perception. The crowd looked at her and saw not a ruler, but a person, small and frightened, caught in the open without the shield of charisma. She sank to her knees. Her maid tried to move to her, and the faceless one's gaze turned toward the maid. The maid stopped, trembling, unable to step. The king staggered forward, eyes flicking between Talia and the faceless one. "Stop," he whispered. "Stop, please." The faceless one turned toward him. In its smooth, blank face, the king saw his own reflection, warped and distorted, as if the world could finally show him what he was. "You took," the voice inside his skull whispered, though the faceless one had no mouth. "You left. You pretended. You built lies over harm. Now look." The king's knees buckled. He sobbed, not in repentance, not truly, but in the horror of exposure. Talia's arms tightened around sun and moon. "What happens now?" she asked, voice low. The faceless one's answer came like a wind through a graveyard. "Now the living decide," it said. Now the palace cannot pretend it did not see. The faceless one faded, not vanishing like smoke, but dissolving into the shadows, as if returning to the place shadows come from. The cold lifted. The torches went out. The sun's light returned, bright and ordinary, and yet nothing was ordinary anymore. The courtyard was a mess of frightened people and scattered weapons. The queen knelt on the stones, mouth moving silently, tears streaking her face. The king stood shaking, his robe hanging loose, his crown askew. The cook remained on his knees, head bowed. Talia stood in the center of it all, holding the children. Her hair was tangled. Her face was bruised. Her eyes were unflinching. The king's advisors gathered quickly, whispering. A palace cannot function without a story, and they needed one that would keep the walls from collapsing. But no story could erase what had been said out loud. The queen, stripped of her voice, could not defend herself. The cook's confession spread through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Servants who had always been silent began to speak, trading secrets, recalling past cruelties, past disappearances, past punishments that had been hidden behind closed doors. A queen without a voice is a queen without power. The advisors moved with grim efficiency. The queen was confined, not in a dungeon with chains, but in her own chambers, guarded, her jewels removed, her dresses replaced with plain cloth. She pounded on the door. She screamed without sound. She scratched words into the wood until her nails broke. It did not matter. No one listened. The palace that had once revolved around her now stepped around her like a stone in the road. The king, humiliated and shaken, tried to approach Talia. He found her in the nursery, sitting by the window with sun and moon asleep in her arms. The room smelled of milk and clean linen, but Talia's presence made it feel like a place where truths were spoken. He knelt before her, a king folding himself down like a pleading child. "I can make this right," he whispered. Talia looked at him for a long moment. "Can you?" she asked. "Can you unmake what you did in the forest? Can you give me back the years I slept? Can you give me back my consent?" The king flinched as if struck. "I was wrong," he said. "I was." Talia's gaze did not soften. "Wrong is what you say when you choose the wrong road," she said. "What you did was harm, and harm has a shape. It lives in people. It grows." The king's eyes filled with tears. "What do you want?" he asked. Talia looked down at her children. "I want them safe," she said. "I want them raised away from your appetites and your lies. I want a life where I do not wake in the night feeling hands that are not there. I want to decide what happens to my body and my family." The king swallowed. "Take anything," he said. "Lands, titles, wealth, I will give it." Talia nodded once. "Then listen," she said. "You will acknowledge them publicly as your children. You will set aside the queen, not because you are brave, but because you fear what the palace has seen. You will grant me a place where I can live without being under your thumb. You will send guards to protect my home, not to watch me. You will fund the cook's freedom and reward him because he chose mercy over obedience. And you will not come to my bed, not ever. If you try, I will not need the forest to punish you. I will do it myself." The king trembled. He nodded, because he had finally learned that some doors, once opened, lead only to consequences. And so arrangements were made. A manor on the edge of the kingdom was given to Talia, surrounded by orchards and fields, far from the palace's stone throat. It was not a prison disguised as a gift. It was a borderland, close enough for protection, far enough for breathing. Sun and moon grew there beneath open sky. They were strange children. They laughed more easily than their mother, but their laughter sometimes came at odd moments, as if they heard things others did not. Animals watched them with quiet attention. Birds followed them along fences. Sometimes, in the evening, when the sun sank and the moon rose, the light around them seemed to sharpen, as if the world were being cut into clearer shapes. Talia loved them fiercely, but she never forgot the shadow that had brought them into being. She taught them kindness with urgency, as if kindness were not simply virtue, but a weapon against inherited darkness. She taught them that taking is not the same as earning. She taught them that silence can be forced, and that the world will try to make them complicit in its lies. In the palace, the queen lived on, voiceless. People assumed she would die of rage. But rage can keep a person alive. Rage can be a heart's substitute for love. She aged behind closed doors, her beauty fading, her hands trembling, her eyes burning with helpless fury. Sometimes servants swore they heard scratching in the night, as if she were still writing on the walls, still trying to carve her story into stone. The king ruled, but his reign was haunted. He avoided the forest. He avoided sleep. He kept candles lit even at noon. He flinched at the sound of spinning wheels in the market. He grew older quickly, as men do when their sins finally catch up. And in the forest, the summer house decayed, roof collapsing, walls sinking into moss. The stream continued whispering. The trees continued watching. The clearing became a place animals avoided. Travelers who wandered near it felt a chill and turned away without knowing why. Some nights, when the moon was thin as a blade, a faceless figure could be seen between the trunks, standing still, listening. And sometimes, very rarely, a great tortoise would crawl to the edge of the stream and blink at its reflection, as if checking to see whether the world had learned anything at all. Years passed. Sun grew into a boy with eyes too perceptive. Moon grew into a girl with a laugh like wind chimes in a storm. They were loved in their mother's manor, protected by guards who respected Talia's boundaries and feared her resolve. They were educated, not as royals trapped in palace games, but as people who understood the weight of choice. When Sun was old enough to ride alone, he asked his mother about the scar on her finger, the small dark mark that never faded. Talia looked at it, remembering the yew spindle, the dream, the faceless hands. "It is a reminder," she said, "that wanting can open doors, that you must be careful what you ask for and who you ask it from. Moon, listening, asked quietly, "Did something take you, Mother?" Talia's throat tightened. She looked at her children, at their earnest faces. "Yes," she said, "something took from me. People took from me. But listen, I am still here, and you are here, and the truth is here. That is how we survive, not by pretending darkness did not happen, but by refusing to let it become our language." Moon nodded, solemn. Sun clenched his jaw, anger blooming in his young face. "Will it happen to us?" Sun asked. "Will the darkness come for us?" Talia placed a hand on his cheek. "It will try," she said. "The world always tries. But you are not helpless. You are not asleep. You will know what to do with your hands. You will know when to say no. And if something ancient watches, let it watch. We will not be the monsters it expects." That night, after the children slept, Talia sat by the window. Outside, the orchards rustled softly. The sky was clear. The moon hung bright. Talia thought of the faceless one, of the way it had enforced a balance, not through kindness, but through inevitability. She thought of the queen, voiceless, still alive. She thought of the king, frightened, still ruling. She thought of the cook, now living freely in a small cottage, no longer in the palace's shadow, who sometimes sent baskets of bread to Talia's manor with a note that said only, "I did what I could." She lifted her scarred finger and traced it with her thumb. In the far distance, beyond the orchards, beyond the fields, beyond the roads, the forest lay black against the horizon. For a moment, she thought she saw movement at its edge, a pale shape between trunks. She did not flinch. She met the darkness with her eyes open, because this was the difference between stories told to children and stories whispered in the dark. In the clean versions, evil is an outsider, a witch in a tower, a curse delivered and then defeated. In the old versions, evil is hunger and entitlement and silence, and the way power tries to chew up the powerless. In the old versions, waking up is not a kiss. It is the hard act of returning to your own body, to your own voice, and then daring to speak when the world would rather you stay asleep. And if you are listening right now, in whatever room you are in whatever night surrounds you, then hear this. The forest is always watching, not because it loves you, not because it hates you, but because it remembers. And what you do, and what is done to you, does not vanish when the candles go out. It lives in the bark. It lives in the stones. It lives in the stories. That is why we tell them, so the darkness cannot pretend it was never there, so the sleeping can wake, so the watchers, faceless and patient, will find less and less to collect. Now take a slow breath with me. Feel your shoulders. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. Let the room around you come back into focus. Let the story loosen its grip. If you enjoyed this descent into an older, crueler kind of fairy tale, and if you want more stories that peel back the pretty mask and show what waits underneath, you know what to do. Leave a comment with the kind of nightmares you prefer, and share this with someone who likes their bedtime stories sharp enough to draw blood. Please also like the video and subscribe. Until next time, this is Whispers in the Dark. Good night.
Whispers of a love so true, painting dreams of me and you. And I'll hold you close in this moment so divine. Whispers of